So what I'm going to talk about in the next couple of minutes is what I would say was the broadest attempt to politicize the current crisis regime, also out of a German perspective, of the Blockupy movement. My talk is embedded in my PhD project, in which I am actually trying to work on what kind of opportunities and what kind of closings are produced by specific spatial actions. I wish to learn about how actions in space, the modification of space and the acquisition of space and so forth and so on lead to a politicization of society in total. And therefore I'm working on two case studies and I have a theoretical approach too that are more or less interlinked. The one case study is Blockupy. I'm going to talk on this. The other one is are the protests here in Athens, where I will choose several smaller topics, but I don't know yet. So I will talk about Blockupy, I know better. The other one, I won't talk also about this now, but I think it's important to know what I'm doing. I'm trying to think together a Lefebvrean idea of production of space with a more broader term of production, following a post-foundationalism idea of society. Was worked out from Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, and I'm working on this division, these two terms. The political and politics are very important for me, but I'll leave this beside. So what I'm going to do now is I will give a brief overview what was going on since 2009 in German protest landscape. Then I will go on to Blockupy, what it is and why Frankfurt. Then I will focus on what really happened during the protests and then come to a short conclusion. And I have lots of pictures. I'm a very fan of pictures, so it's more a slideshow than something else what's going to come now. Yes, I'll go back once again. As the first signs of crisis were in media at the beginning of 2008, end of 2007, I think a lot of people were very astonished about what's happening. I think there was also some kind of happiness that the banks are going to crash now. I think it wasn't to be seen what's going to happen in the next years, and so it was a really interesting situation. And I would say in 2008, right at the beginning, there was a situation where also the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, what is one of the leading conservative liberal newspapers in Germany, titled "Marx is Right." So I think there was a broad discussion right from the beginning, but this closed very fast, this opportunity to discuss. And I would say, out of a German perspective, Bernd has already talked a little bit about the big situation that led towards that there was a very fast recovery out of an economic perspective in Germany. But I would also highlight that especially in the northern parts of Europe, but also in Germany, the left, but also an anti-capitalist left, was not at all prepared for that what would become. There was no understanding of what this crisis would bring forward. And so despite this massive precarization that we could see since 2000, following the Hartz-IV changes in legislation, there was just no way of entering a field of politicization of this situation. On the other hand, there was a very fast ongoing politics that was pushed forward by Angela Merkel and her government, that there is no alternative to austerity in Europe. So there was a very fast ideological pushing forward of this idea that it has to, we have to push forward austerity, and that was accompanied by a very racist, and I would also say deteriorative campaign against the lazy Greeks and Spanish people. And so in the consequence, it was a very, very hard field for social movements to enter and to start working with. So I would say the beginning point for the movement was a very marginalized standing. But nevertheless, in March 2009, there were first bigger demonstrations. There were, on the same day, there was a demonstration in Frankfurt and Berlin, where in total 55,000 people attended the demonstration under the slogan, "We won't pay for your crisis." The interesting thing then at the beginning was that this protest was very strongly focused on the banking situation. It was a very strong focus on that we won't pay for the debts that the banks have produced. So it wasn't yet a protest that was really linked to the European situation. So it had a more narrow understanding of that what the crisis would be. Then yes, there was a longer time. It was very quiet between 2009 and 2010. There was planned a bank blockade also in Frankfurt, but that never happened. It was also never planned. It was just a talking about. Then the year 2011 came, and you see October. It took until October until in Frankfurt the Occupy movement started, because at the beginning of 2011 everybody was still very nobody really still knew how to go on with this. Then came the Arab Spring, then was the M15 movement in Spain, then was this occupations here in Greece, then New York, and afterwards it actually swept again, came over to Germany again, and that was actually some kind of starting point of something like more of a movement that was more focused on crisis in a broader regime. But nevertheless, it has to be said that it still was like that the radical left, especially the radical left, wasn't part of this movement here, because out of historical conditions, but also about due to inner theoretical debates, there is inside the left there's a very there are big doubts about movements that bring forward a criticism of capitalism that is very strongly linked to a personalized critique of capitalism, and so this formulated idea of 1% of greedy troublemakers against 99% of innocent people was seen as a risk of emerging patterns of anti-Semitism, and so there was really still a waiting on what was happening. So there weren't very strong interlinkages. So it took on until March 2012, when the first larger demonstrations took place that really focused on a capitalist perspective, and were also launched out of a more radical left window. It was a European Day of Action Against Capitalism on the 31st of March 2012, where in Frankfurt 6,000 people demonstrated in the city. It came to major clashes inside the city. It was several banks, luxury hotels, shops in the city center were attacked and destroyed. It was estimated to be something of over 1 million euros of costs, and 465 people were taken in detention on this day in the city. And it's important to say this because it was important for how Blockupy emerged. So it's not only a telling about riot stories, but it was very strongly interlinked with what happened some weeks later at the Blockupy. So I will shift now to what came with the Blockupy situation. And okay. There was a declaration at the 26th of February 2012 where over 400 people met in two bigger action conferences where it was discussed how to organize a broader protest also in Germany. And there was this declaration from the European Action Conference that actually where it was decided that in May 2012 in Frankfurt a very broad protest against the European Central Bank and the Troika politics shall be started. Inspired from the mass movements in the in the Mediterranean, but also occupy. The idea was to occupy the city center, to close down the European Central Bank for a day, to put up tents in the city center, and to have several days of civil disobedience in the city center of Frankfurt. And it has to be said that in contrast to the M31 movement, this Blockupy movement was much more heterogeneous. It can be said that it was about more or less, it were these groups that were already involved in the No Global movement at the beginning of the 2000s and reached from left wings of the trade unions until to autonomous groups. But perhaps a little bit in contrast also that what I've heard about the Greek situation, it was never like that Blockupy and the M31 movement really worked against each other. It was a critical discourse under each other, but during the mobilization for 2013 and also for 2014, these movements also grew more together, and there is a discussion under these groups, and so it's a really broad movement that came together under this banner of Blockupy. And it's also important to say that Blockupy is not Occupy. That's something that's often mixed, but it's a really two different things. Exactly. At the beginning of the mobilization of Blockupy, it actually was clear that Frankfurt was chosen because it was an important banking place. The banks and the transnational companies that were seated in Frankfurt were actually the main reason to come to Frankfurt. But during the mobilization and also the process that went through from the first Blockupy to the second one, and also more to now, there was a shifting away from this banking, from this critique towards the banks, towards a much more strongly focus on the critique against the Troika, the European crisis regime as in total, and so there was a very strong change in the perspective. And so the European Central Bank, as located in Frankfurt, actually got the major target of these protests. But the argument had also had a local shifting away. As on the beginning, the idea was really this: we won't pay for your crisis, the bad banks and all those greedy bankers. It changed, and it was really visible that it was a stronger attempt to also get in a deeper discussion about how crisis works in Germany and to talk about everyday lives out of a German perspective. So I would say there's a very strong transnational focus inside. It has a very strong idea of solidarity with the European South, but also very important is this shifting over to a more local perspective inside this protest. But nevertheless, this European perspective was and is very important, and so a member of the interventionistic left that is also part of this Blockupy movement, this person said, the aim is to answer to European crisis regime with a European perspective from below, and in terms of organization and coordination. That means for us to accept Europe as terrain for our struggle, and that we have to start to act in this sense. Then I want to make a short excursus now, because I think you can't understand why Frankfurt was chosen when we don't have a quick look on the history of Frankfurt. And so, because I think only briefly, but we have to start after the Second World War. Frankfurt then was chosen by the Western Allies as the seat of them, so it had a very strong, very important political role. Because due to shifting away the political power away from Berlin, also the German Central Bank founded its seat in Frankfurt, and a lot of banks that formerly were seated in Berlin came back to Frankfurt and organized themselves there. And so already short after the Second World War, Frankfurt was actually laid as was the ground was laid for this major banking place in Germany to arise, and today it is. I mean, it's also a major banking place in Europe, when not the most important, but a very important one it is. So after a longer period of social democratic hegemony in the 70s, that changed, and the CDU, that was the party of Merkel, they got in power, and it wasn't them that started with this global city formation, but under the CDU government there was a very strong pushing forward of this. All the high-rises were planned, they were built, and there were very strongly struggles and fights in the city about the restructuring of the city, and that, what you may perhaps know about the Frankfurter Häuserkampf, was very strong related to this shifting of Frankfurt. And then in the early 90s, already in the 80s, Frankfurt wished to be the seat of the European Central Bank. It got the seat of the European Central Bank, but that was something that was never uncontested. But in the end, I think 1994, the first meeting of the central bank took place in the buildings of the city council in Frankfurt, and from 1999 on, they're in the city center here in the central business district, what you see behind here. And from in 2013, they get this beautiful new building that is a little bit located outside, and really has a single standing in the city's skyline view. But to this, it has to be mentioned that the city got even more polarized during the time. There are strong gentrification protests, strong processes going on, but also there is a very strong change of people who live there. It's a very expensive city, and for example, it has to be named that in the last years there was a massive increase of housing evictions, and so there is a very polarized situation, and only that to Frankfurt. Because, yeah, that's actually the history, and that's a little bit the thing why Frankfurt was a place, or seemed to be a good place, or why they always tell it's a good place for these protests. Then, Blockupy 2012. Actually, it was planned from the 16th to the 19th of May, and it has to be said, it was planned, because due to this clashes that happened at the end of March, the city decided itself to forbid everything. It forbid the complete action days from all. And Markus Frank, he is a part of the city council, he said, when 40,000 demonstrators explicitly wish to shut down the city life for 4 days, and as such consciously interfere into basic rights of other people, it is obvious that the city council cannot accept this and has to safeguard a socially acceptable measure of interference. So we see no other possibility than forbidding the actions. And that is what happened. And due to appeal in the front of the court, it was possible to legalize the main demonstration on the 19th of May, but everything else remained forbidden. Nevertheless, there was activists didn't want to stop coming to Frankfurt, and so police also did, and that was the way they actually marched in Frankfurt. This is the very small city center. The university would be here. And they had more or less 5,000 police officers gathered in this small part of the city day and night over the whole days. And it was a massive presence. And yeah, the good thing of this presence was that they actually shut down everything. And so it was a massive interference in the banking place, but also in the local shops, and the big stores couldn't really work well, because it was really, everything was just shut. As I said, nevertheless, the first days 2,000 to 3,000 people came to Frankfurt to to try to launch protests anyway. And one example of a tried protest was this occupation of the city center. This here is the city, the Parliament House of Frankfurt, and this is the square in front, and you see these tents that were built up. So it was a try to resist this massive criminalization and to build up, but nevertheless, police just they evicted the square in several hours of action there, so it couldn't be held, but people were there and were trying. At the actual day of the blockade, that would have been a day after, people tried to get out in the streets and to block things, but it didn't really work out. And so during the first 3 days, so before the big demonstrations, 1,430 people were taken in detention and banned out of the city center. And the repression had a mass that was not seen before in Frankfurt, but also not in a German perspective. The mass demonstration then could take place in a very well-organized way. 30,000 people came to Frankfurt to attend this demonstration, and it was a good ending of these days, and people were happy to have had this demonstration. 2013, actually right from the beginning, it was clear that because it was known that 2014 the European Central Bank would open its new building, and so it was clear that that will be the major mobilization in the next year, and so 2013 had a little bit a transition spot. Because of the problems the year before to build up tents, there was a legalized camp this time, a little bit outside of the city, and that was a very important place to meet, to talk, to hear concerts, and so that was a very important place. And yes, the action days itself, it was the same idea as the year before. It was the idea to block the European Central Bank, but what came new this time, so you see, was the idea of a second wave of actions, in which not also the European crisis as the European Central Bank should be targeted, but also things like the racist deportation regime that was targeted at the city airport, but also working conditions in the textile sector, the housing question, land grabbing were topics that were focused on in a second wave of blockades. And I think one of the major actions that took place, besides the successful blockade of the European Central Bank that has to be said, I think, more or less, even if it was highly symbolic, but it was successful in the end, were the actions on the Zeil, what is the main shopping street in Frankfurt, and several big magazines had to close, were shut down, and one under them was also where the workers were on strike, and the shop was reopened by strike breakers, but due to the actions in front of the shop, it could get closed down. That was something new. So it actually was a good day, it was a more or less peaceful day, and police didn't interfere so strong, but that then should change the next day. For the 1st of June 2013, it was planned to have this big demonstration. It should start here. 20,000 people gathered here at the Basler Platz. It should have walked the red route and end by the European Central Bank. There was a big discussion before the demonstration. The city wanted the demonstration to lead here. So what happened after 800 meters of demonstration here in this blue square, the police just blocked and encircled the first 900 people of this demonstration that they called the so-called Black Bloc. It wasn't really, and that was just here. And what they wanted actually at the moment is that the demonstration, the peaceful demonstration, how they call it, the other about 19,000 people, they should have went here and walked on the green route, and should just have left behind the 900 troublemakers. So that didn't work out. This is actually the front of the demonstration. This is would be here on this part, and that was the back row. And this is the main demonstration here, and you can see these rows are this white line here, and the main demonstration just turned back there. And the very impressive thing on this day actually was that even though Blockupy is such a broad and such a heterogeneous movement, the people just stayed. The whole demonstration refused to let the encircled people there. There were several attempts to break through the demonstration. You can see it a little bit here, but also that was actually on the backside towards the main demonstration. That's were the arrestings inside this police kettle, because they took in detention all 900 people that they closed in at that point. Nevertheless, it took them 9 hours to arrest all the people. About 5,000 people remained behind the demonstration until the evening, and that was the last group you can see here that they arrested then. And these were the people staying there, and after all were arrested. I mean, it wasn't possible to get through them. The people stayed there, and there was a very strong demonstration then after the arresting measurements. At 11 o'clock in the night, people walked back together to the camp, and there was a big party in the camp, although these days, because people felt very strong about this thing, that it wasn't broken up, so it wasn't a division inside the movement, and that was something really, really important. And so I'm coming to the end, and I will just only give a brief overview of what was going to be 2014. There was another European Action Conference 2 weeks ago in Frankfurt, where out of 15 European countries, 450 people came together, and it was decided to organize European mass mobilization to the opening event of the European Central Bank. The date is not clear yet, but that shall happen, and there will be a global week of action in May 2014. And what is, out of my point of view, very, very important in this, there was a further shifting in the way Blockupy sees itself, because the keywords, they actually shifted away during the conference, and it was a decision to shift this away from crisis and from the whole banking problematic situation, and it was decided to focus more on the pleading of the reclaiming of the commons, the struggle for democracy and solidarity. So there was a shift towards a positive formulation. And so to conclude, I would say I want to highlight 2 points that I see very important. So it can be seen a learned process in the movement. Topics have changed. They shifted away from a mere critique of banking system to a critique of capitalism in a broader sense. In addition, the understanding of the crisis, its dimension and the importance of solidarity in the revitalization of struggle from below has grown. So in reference to discussions here in Greece, but also in Spain, parts of the Blockupy network are starting to talk about how to formulate a more positive utopia and get over the simple patterns of criticism. Therefore, the contact and exchange, I think, is very important with the movements in other parts of Europe. The other thing is that there can be seen that the Blockupy movement as movement grew strongly together. It's a strong solidarity inside the movement. Nevertheless, it is so heterogeneous, and due to that, what happened during the Arab Spring, but also here in Greece and Spain, there is something like a positive feeling, and also, even if the movement still is not too strong, there is a growing feeling that something somehow can and could be changed. So thank you for your attention.